It's very common in church world. It's not about, Jesus, I'm going to deny myself for you and your cause. It's about Jesus coming alongside of me to help me accomplish my goals, my dreams, my desires, my aspirations. Well, that's can be a believer, but that's not necessarily a disciple, because a disciple is all about him, and it's all about denying myself to accomplish his mission. So there is what's called the Last Supper, and at the Last Supper, there are only disciples. And when you read that, you'll see that they're referred to as his disciples. And so Jesus is alone with his disciples, not the crowd, but the disciples. And notice what he speaks to the disciples. Again, not the crowd. He says, if you abide in me, and my words abide in you, underline, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. And then he says, my Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit, and then underline, and so prove to be my disciples. So prove to be my disciples. So again, he's not speaking to the crowd. He's making specific promises to the disciples, in this case, behind closed doors. And he says, to those of you who will allow my word to abide in you, you're abiding in my word, it's abiding in you, then what you notice, there's a commitment. There's a commitment to his word. And he says, and here's the promise that I'm going to give you if you do this. The promise is going to be answered prayer. You're going to see prayers answered in very unique ways. So we could say, based upon that verse, that the answered prayer actually becomes the evidence of being a disciple, which is going to be very different than the crowd at large. So it's a very different promise than to have rest. He says that to the believers, the crowd, but to the disciples, it's much more specific. So the difference here would be commitment. It will involve a different level of authority. As disciples, different than the crowd, what we find is that disciples are not doing their thing. Disciples are always on his mission. They're always doing what he says. So disciples are not people who are casually following him. They're all in. So many times what happens, and I'm going to say something here. And as I say this, I just want you to know up front, this is not you people. It's not nothing like that. It's nothing at all. But I want to share some things, and my hope is that you will at least prayerfully consider, and see, is the Lord saying something to you? Okay? Do that? Okay. So many times in our world, believers, casual followers, are frustrated that they lack what is promised to disciples. They're frustrated. Why isn't that happening in my life, some of these promises? So like for the believer, the crowd who loves Jesus, they're going to heaven. Nobody questions that. Many times what happens is like if they're serving the Lord in some way and they become a little bit more busier than usual, for many, the first thing that takes place, the first thing that they do is they stop their service to the Lord in some way. Or if they're putting the Lord first in their finances and things get tight, the first thing that they change would be they're putting the Lord first in their finances. So that's very different than a disciple. For a disciple, they're always on his mission. They're always following him. And so you notice that Jesus loves the crowd. They're coming to him. They're being healed, so it's not like they're bad, and we don't want to convey that in any way. But you notice that he's never saying to the crowd of people, go lay your hands on the sick and they will recover. He only says that to disciples. And so you don't want to think as we get into this that God is mad or, upset with somebody, but the call is going to be to take steps towards being a disciple, because there's different promises and there's different results. Now, for those who say, I want some of those promises that I see that the Bible talks about for disciples. And this is, well, how do I become a disciple? Well, there on your outline, in Mark's gospel, it says, he summoned the multitude, we'd say that's the crowd, the greater crowd, with his disciples. So you got both groups there, both groups. And he said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. The crowd believed in Jesus, and that's why they're there. They're going to heaven. They love Jesus. That's why they're there. And the invitation is given if you want to be a disciple. He says, if anyone wishes, that there's the invitation. But here's what it's going to involve. It's going to involve denying ourselves. And it's probably going to mean that at some point in your walk with the Lord, you're going to become inconvenienced in your following of the Lord. Anybody here ever been inconvenienced as you follow the Lord? Am I the only one? Yeah, we've all been there. So, but being a disciple will mean, as you deny yourself, that means that you're going to be on his mission. It's not my mission. It's very common in church world, and think this through, for many people in church, it's not about, Jesus, I'm going to deny myself for you and your cause. It's about Jesus coming alongside of me to help me accomplish my goals, my dreams, my desires, my aspirations. Well, that's can be a believer, but that's not necessarily a disciple, because a disciple is all about him, and it's all about denying myself to accomplish his mission. Does that make sense to you? So for a disciple, it's very different, because a disciple, Jesus is the priority. So someone says, well, I can't serve right now in some capacity because, I've got so much going on. And you go, okay, but that's good, but that's not a disciple, that's a believer. Because the crowd believed in him and they wanted to hear him, and that's why they're there, and I'll keep saying that. But Jesus says, if you're going to come and you're going to follow me, what it means is you're going to have to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. And so Jesus becomes the priority, not a priority. So that's the first thing that we notice. Now, another thing that we notice, and please write this down, that we notice that disciples make other disciples. Disciples make other disciples. Jesus speaking to disciples, and he said this there in Matthew 28. He said, therefore, go and make disciples in all nations. The truth is that disciples make other disciples. I would hold that you can't really be a disciple if there's not somewhere in your life where the Lord is using you to help people grow in their relationship with the Lord. Believers, absolutely. But disciples, no, because disciples make other disciples. Because disciples are passionate about seeing people grow in their relationship with the Lord.